So I think from our last meeting, we just discussed all the line items, and we kind of made a decision that Hyan and I need to do some more research on the experience with the environment dashboard to help inform our path forward on a couple of things. So I've kicked off the opportunity canvas, and I posted a recording of that in our channel. And then we've already scheduled some of the improvements in those epics for future milestones. So we should get them into just a normal workflow and start rendering those. As far as Jake, any action items that you think you had or that you started to do?
I think my action items out of last time was just to update what could be prioritized for next milestone. I think maybe it was also move some issues to a technical epic. I think there were like some test issues that didn't really, that they were for backend and testing, and I think those can be moved to a technical epic. And also creating a sort of technical evaluation issue to get a better understanding of our environments and operations dashboard and just the landscape and what problems or how we can address some problems in those, with just giving more context to those. And I think finally was figuring out if the environments dashboard was written in Vue for Hyana, so that we know whether we can replace the parts of the dashboard with already created components from pajamas. So on that last note, Hyana, yes, the environments dashboard does look like it's mostly written in Vue. So I do think that we can utilize a lot of pajamas here. In terms of,
oh, sorry.
I was just going to say that in terms of creating the tech eval issue, I actually haven't done that yet.
Got it. I did move those two issues already, so okay. We're good on that front. I moved them right when we called them out in our last meeting. Okay, perfect. That's a good update. I added an item to our agenda today. The first one is a heat map issue. So this is like a quick and dirty way to solve one of our biggest pain points for our customers, which is like, how can I see for a quick snapshot where are the environments at in their life cycle, like from the last pipeline status, are they available, passed, canceled, or blocked? And I think this issue has a bunch of content in it from Nathan's feedback. So I would love, Jake, for you to put your eyes on it and give me any perspective on like if we should change the chart or if you think it'll need some more effort around the product like problem side. And then we can look at scheduling that in the near future after Hyana puts some prototypes against it. Sound good? Okay. Yeah. And then while we had you, Hyana had an issue around supporting releases at the group level. She wanted to talk to you about from a front-end perspective. So she has some prototypes that she can walk through.
Yeah, I'm gonna share my screen. Are you familiar with this issue, Jake? Do we need to dive into the scope?
I have not seen this issue before.
That came to mind.
Yeah, it looks kind of.
So sure. At a high level, one of our bigger pain points from our customers are being able to create and organize releases across multiple projects. So we have a release tag from a project that contributes to a production environment that an end user would view as, let's say, it's an e-commerce website and I want to purchase something as an end user. And this site actually has 4 or 5 microservices populating it, as well as an integration to something like Stripe or PayPal. And those in GitLab have 4 different projects that feed into that one customer experience. Well, as a release manager, all I really care about is the continuity of experience for the end user purchasing shoes on my website. And today it's very hard to see, one, that target production environment, but also all the activities that are going to go into that end customer experience when I'm corralling a bunch of microservices across multiple projects. So what we're trying to accomplish with both sharing environments and creating a group release is aggregating this cross-project information to make it easy to orchestrate and plan across multiple teams as a release manager or as a development team lead who's building multiple binaries to feed into an experience.
Okay, and so group milestones is that like the end goal, or is that just like one piece to the puzzle?
So group milestones is like the first MVC from
Okay.
a planning perspective. When we look at the group milestone association, it's like a lightweight way for users who are leveraging milestones in GitLab to view the contents of that milestone in context to a release.
Okay, that makes sense.
That being said, thank you, Jackie. I'm going to share my screen, Jake, so you can look at the prototypes. It's actually linked here, but you can also look at the Figma prototype. Can you folks see that on the screen?
Yep.
So, okay, cool. So I'm just gonna walk you through the prototypes and some of the options based on, I guess, the main jobs to be done. So my design experimentation here was around how can we group assign the milestones to, sorry folks, hold up. This one is, okay, to properly use at the group level. I was gonna talk about milestones. Associating the existing releases that we have now at the project level in a group view. So the first flow would be the user creates a new group release or a new bucket with these existing items. I'm not going to really dive into all these details, but essentially my initial proposal is that we add to the group level a releases page. And there you're going to see all these buckets. And how you add these items to the group view is from the project release page. Does that make sense? I know it's a lot of releases in a single sentence.
Yep, yeah. Makes sense.
Okay, so the first prototype, and then the questions I want from you is that, of course, on feasibility and also if there's anything that can be improved in this flow. The first one is creating a new group release or a version. So this prototype actually shows how it would look like if we had everything at the group level. So let's say you give a name to this item, you select where you want to create from. So you select which projects. So let's say that you're doing it from pajamas and from GitLab UI. So you can have a drop down there where you just search and select the projects from here. We discussed briefly about having release assets to it, added to it, and the users could potentially add the same way as they do now in the release page, or maybe selecting from a list that loads from the target, let's say. So imagine you have a blog post for pajamas release 9.1, and then the assets are going to load here, so you can select which ones you want to. Group milestone, so when we get there, you will be able to select which group milestone this group release will belong to, and then some sort of release notes or a description to it. So essentially the form will be very similar to the one we have in the current release page, but then focusing on, this the description and the target for the group release.
Mm.
Yeah.
So when you create release assets from a group release form and you have multiple projects selected, when you go into our group releases and going to be entirely independent from project releases. So like if you go into like a project, you won't see these release assets associated with any releases because they are completely different from a group release, right?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, and I also think that because, and Jackie, correct me if I'm wrong, there's no really like a code base behind the group release. I think the assets would be something external, so like a
Yeah.
blog post or something, yeah, that it's not attached to the Git tag, for example.
It's weird because when you look at a group release, it's not really a release at all because there's no repository behind it. It's just an
Yeah.
aggregation of the release tags from, again, as release manager, I have this e-commerce website. I have 4
Yep.
microservices that are populating it. That is not, the code base isn't with that release. It's just all the adjacencies that feed into it.
Right. Yeah. So I think now like when you're creating a release, like it's associated with a release tag. When you create like a release asset, you have to, with our like API as it currently stands, like you have to use the a project ID and a release tag from that project. So this is more creating like a layer of interaction that's for the project manager and to better like enable like what they have to do with their work, but doesn't necessarily tie in right now with how our API, like our API doesn't really enable this at the moment.
Right. And if we think about like GitLab and how we work, we could leverage this relationship pretty nicely because we have like a runner, the pajamas, like we have all these
Mhm.
sub projects that being able to group them into like a persistent object that shows that this is the gitlab.org release would be really meaningful.
Mhm. Okay. Yeah, I totally see the thought process behind this. Do just kind of processing in real time right now, but I think that this makes a lot of sense. I think the only thing that I'm wondering is, do we want um, do we want any project level um, create like editing or creation on this form at all? Like, would we want project milestones? I just don't see how it would fit. I think I'm just thinking and
Yeah.
processing it at the same time. But I think this looks good to me. This makes sense for creating these group level artifacts.
Yeah, and I had another prototype where I have a similar question. So, for example, when I'm selecting a group release for my project release, right? I want to associate this thing here to a higher level. Am I able to create a group release from the project view? So it becomes a bit confusing. And I
Hmm.
think that feeling says that it will be a nice MVC to be able here, for example, to just show items. So here where you say select create from, we could potentially say only show projects that have releases or only show, the group milestones. So you can select, but not really start creating things from here because then you go to a different workflow and yeah,
Yeah,
the
I
way
think
that, yeah, go ahead.
I think that create from drop down is a really to me like that stands out as like a really powerful part of this UI. I think it really shows that like this form is really something that kind of creates this this layer of meta information based on projects within your group. So um, yeah, I can see how like how we're sort of thinking of it bi-directionally. Like, do we want to be able to manipulate project releases from here, and with a project release form, do we want to be able to add things to group releases? But I think that from what this looks like right now, this looks totally fine for. This looks great for creating um, group
Yeah.
releases with group milestones associated with them.
So
Uh,
if for this first issue of supporting release, just a project release association to a group milestone, would we, do we have separate prototypes for that, Hyana? because like that will be like the first increment, I think, to accomplishing this truly like group experience. Yeah. So this is what we'd be implementing in that first issue, Jake, that I currently have scheduled for 13.3.
Okay.
It has like a tab for group milestones
Yeah.
on the releases page.
Yeah, I added a tab component here. Actually, that's where things got a little bit complicated because Nathan actually extended the drop-down component to have like subheaders when you are creating. I think it's in the release in this form. But then again, when we have like with this, and you have, I don't know, like what GitLab has, hundreds of project milestones and thousands of project milestones and hundreds of group milestones. I think the experience becomes a little bit flaky. And that was the first option. I thought that instead of showing here, subheaders inside the dropdown, that I don't know, we can play around with it. Maybe a tab navigation where when you select one thing, one or the other options. Right. I don't know. I think we need to validate this because it's a complete new pattern informed selection with GitLab.
Yeah, I think I think like the intent is really good, right? Because we want to be able to give a compact UI that still allows the user to pick either a project or group milestone, or but I think the question that might happen is like, what is this UI guiding the user to do? Is it guiding them to pick only a project milestone or a group milestone, or to be able to pick both at the same time? And then also, yeah, when we end up with multiple, when we end up with GitLab scale number of milestones, how do we handle that as well? But definitely, I like the intent here a lot, though, and the UI looks really nice.
Yeah, I don't think we really have any patterns for this. I don't know, other than when you create a milestone or you have to, I don't know, add it to milestone. But I don't think we have form patterns for things that work on such a wider scale.
Yeah.
And even with this, with the drop-down component, I'm like, yeah, cool. We use a drop-down component, but I feel that's the more complexity we add to this small UI interactions, the more tricky it's going to become to make them, I don't know, just easy to use. But that's a future plan, but that's my gut feeling here. With selecting, yeah, on a project level, something in a group, but then you have to select, like what you're saying, A or B. Because, for example, if you select a project milestone, can you still select a group milestone? Right. I think in my head, it's fine.
Right. I think the idea is I mean, I think when I saw this UI, that was something that I was kind of thinking in terms of, if I was like in a user's shoes, is this asking me to pick one or the other, or enabling me to pick both? In terms of project milestones or group milestones, or both project and group milestones. And yeah, I think it's just a question of like what our like our intent is with this component
Yeah.
long term.
Because if it's the case, then we don't really need a tab navigation. You can have just two inline forms where you just you either bypass, or you don't really have to select anything if you don't want to. You can still go to your group milestone, and then in the future, let's say you go to your group milestone, and then you have the option releases, and then you attach your releases there. You associate them there.
I think that second flow is more boring and more actionable for a user, like when they're in line, because then you can do either or neither.
Yeah. What is nice about this UI is that in, I don't know, in like 3 years, if there's some other milestone type. Right now we have project and group, but if for some reason we can imagine some other type of milestone that ought to be created, then it would fit really nicely with adding a third tab here. But yeah, I think that right now kind of a more boring inline flow works really well as well.
Yeah, also easy to implement.
Yeah, yeah.
I think for milestone association, that was the only screen. Yeah, it's already boring. It's just the inline version. So in other words, is this good? We're just gonna have a duplication of this here in the UI. And then I want to show also, this one is not finished, so I'm like, it's gonna be on YouTube, I'm ashamed. The overview of the group releases page, right? So we are playing around with what this page will look like. There's a lot of information. But essentially, once you create this bucket at the group level, you select which project releases you want to show, and then the view would be a simplified release page. So you have the title you gave to it, assets possibly, and then just links to the project releases. So if these project releases are associated to project milestones, you're going to see here what we show now. So the progress, the count of issues, and the completion, and yeah, the milestone start and end dates. And once we are able to associate group milestones to this group release, we'll also see, like on the top somewhere, the progress information. And then we talked about simplified versions. So instead of like you only see assets, for example, once you go to each inner page here, and if the project release don't have really milestones, you don't really show anything, only for milestones associated. I have a couple of questions here that if you want to show, for example, Jackie, who created this, when, and some sort of information that can be also actionable for whoever is managing this page. So that's question A. And also, if we're going to go with the concept of upcoming, expired, group releases, how we would display that in the UI, considering that some of these project releases could have could be upcoming, right? So how do we indicate that in this UI? Lots of information, please.
So we should inherit the status from the sub-projects, kind of like how milestones do it today with issues, for example. And we don't have like a released at attribute visible in the UI. So this means that it's either going to be inherited by someone who has curled the API for the released at attribute to be set in the future for upcoming, or it's inherited by the milestone schedule. So I think that should all be inherited from the project relationships, because again, group releases are an aggregator. Their information should be from the project level. And then maybe we can consider and validate with users if they actually want to associate this object, this version, this bucket, release bucket, to like a group milestone. But I like the way that you have like upcoming and expired. I think expired might be a challenging word. We also might want to consider a pre-release tab. So for users who have a release tag and draft, if we support that in the future, we may end up creating a group release that's a pre-release candidate for approvals. And then it goes through like the approval chain and it deploys and it becomes an active release. So we'll need to think about that workflow too.
The expired here, it's really coming from the milestones, because the milestone expires, and that's kind of the naming convention.
I like that.
But I wonder, like when I look at it, to me it's not clear what the correlation of the milestone, between the milestone and the expiration of the release, because you don't necessarily need to add a milestone to this item if you don't want to. So it doesn't really belong to any bucket in that sense.
Yeah, and I would say if it has no date, then it's just an active release.
Mm-hmm.
And then people can close the release or end it.
That's it. Then we need to do the actions. I didn't prototype that, so so you should be able to edit, of course.
Mm-hmm.
Then, close. Is close the same as? How do we do that with milestone? You can delete it, but
you click a button that says close milestone.
Delete. Yeah. Okay. Any other thoughts on this view? I think here I'm missing like created by someone, just for I wonder.
Maybe we would want to specify the release manager. Because imagine like if there's a rotating team like we have, you want to know who actually owns that release for that time.
So it's like really who is managing this item as the owner.
The owner. Release owner would be a good one.
And I think component-wise, Jake, I think we can just reuse. If we go, of course, with a similar UI, I think we can reuse, right, the existing components from the release overview page.
Yeah. Yeah. This looks pretty reusable to me.
The yellow sticky notes are not included in the design.
Would there be any sort of release evidence associated with group releases? Is that a thing?
No.
Okay.
No, because those are all tied to, production code.
Yeah.
So they could click into this project release title 1 link and it would take them to the release project and they could then release evidence.
Okay. So I think one of the things that we also want to validate next is where people expect to access this page from. So now we have in the project level, you have this tab here, right, on the under overview for releases. So we also are going to add a new page at the group level. You have any thoughts on that? That can just complement the flow.
I mean, I think it works pretty well. I don't see any. I don't think it creates any sort of conflict with anything else going on. So I think it's a good flow. Do you have any? Are there any concerns that you have in mind that you were wondering about?
My first thought is really discoverability, and that's one of the things that we're going to validate in the prototypes, because I've heard people in the past saying that I don't know where releases live, and if let me see if I can show you. Go to a project, to a group. Here. And I just wonder if it's something that we want to replicate from the project release, where you can access from this view as well as the side navigation.
So I think I'm really used to the idea of the release link in the sidebar being underneath like the project overview or the group like in this case it would be under group overview. But so that you're saying that there's been some feedback that that link is difficult to find in the sidebar, or when it's on like the kind of like homepage of a project or a group.
The one on the homepage of the project.
Yeah. Okay.
This one, just to illustrate. Yeah, this one here.
Yeah. And so people are saying that that is that's like not easily recognizable to link off to the release page.
Yeah, I heard that in the past, and also
Okay.
sidebar. But we only show this when there is a release.
Right.
So
We can change that really easily. I think the idea behind hiding it when there's no releases was just to reduce like the surface area of elements on the page when there's nothing to link off to. Because if there's 0 releases and someone clicks on that, it doesn't. There's no real information that they would be getting. But I can see the reason behind always showing that to make it more prominent. So that can be changed. We can always show that link, even if it has no releases. I'm wondering if it's like the location though that's confusing people.
yeah, this looks really pretty much like the old GitHub's UI. And I wonder if Jackie also, once we start, adding this information at the group level, if you want to add something here at recent activity, so releases, so we have like a way to really show at the group level about the versions, the releases here in this box.
So yes, I think that as we support this at the group level, we'll want to keep it consistent with the experience that people have like in their repository. So when you click onto the groups, click into the projects, you have like all of those little buttons. Releases is in that button. So we'll want to do that too. Do you want me to create an issue for that?
Would it make sense to have releases be more top level in the sidebar? Don't want to get too off topic of environments dashboard, but
So that's a really great question, because releases in general are not as discoverable as they could be. People do feel like they have to go into the project, and it's not even in the repository like it was it was in the GitHub experience. So I think yeah, it might make more sense to either follow in line with the configure team is adding a side panel option at the group level called operations. So let me see if I can find that issue.
I think this is one of the cool things that we can validate with the prototypes. Because we also talked to Jack, I think, beginning of, what day is today? My God, beginning of this week, let's say, or last week, about how we're calling these things, if we were really calling them releases or versions or something else. Just keep that in mind. That's
Yeah.
my experience also when from feedback that other designers usually get from adding items to the menus, that naming is important. People can become very frustrated when they don't understand what the menu is about.
Here's this issue. From the operation side of the house, we may want to move releases into there or, you know, bump it up. But just, I agree, Hannah, we'll need to validate it and think about it.
I'll include these versions in the prototypes just so we have the markups.
Got it.
Multiple ways to get there.
Okay. We have about 3 minutes left, so I wanted to cover off on some action items. I think we can probably, do we still want to meet weekly on this topic, or do we feel like we got a good base and now we can transition to biweekly? I'm open to still meeting weekly. But I think the things to do would be, Jake, review that heat map issue and then look more at these prototypes and give feedback back to that support releases at the group level issue. Mm-hmm. I did bump that out to 13.4 because I think, I don't know if we'll have enough runway to deliver it in 13.3. So I've done that proactively.
Yeah, I can definitely address these issues async. I think that, I mean, I don't have any immediate necessity to keep discussing. So I think that moving to a bi-weekly schedule works well for me. But if anyone, you know, if it's more necessary to keep it weekly for anyone else, then I'm totally fine with that as well.
We'll be good with
every other week.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yes.
Yep.
So I've updated the invite. That way we can save some time next week and then meet back up on the week of the 22nd. And hopefully I'll have some customer feedback too on the prototypes that we can discuss on supporting releases at the group level. And the reason why, like, it's tying, why we're talking about this feature with you, Jake, and why it's going to tie into the environments dashboard is that when we look at this whole solving a customer's problem of managing things at scale, releases and environments start becoming more coupled.
That makes sense. Yeah, I'm enlightened after these meetings, seeing how talking about things at the scale of our larger customers really changes the perspective on things. Not to sound all Buddha about it.
Okay, perfect. Awesome. Anything else, Hannah, for your perspective?
No, Jake, if you have any other feedback, feel free to just throw your comments in the Figma project.
Okay, that sounds good.
So,
awesome. Thank you all so much. We'll talk soon.
bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.